Good to see everybody, man. And we're excited to have this conversation. I think Kensen brought up something good of the idea of just kind of the shifting that we all had to kind of go through in light of having church one Sunday, thinking we're going to just cancel for 1 week, and then it turned into a full year for many of us. But before we dig into the conversation, I want to give introductions. I know many of us know each other already, but I've got my brother, Derrick Puckett. He's actually the president of the Chicago Partnership and lead pastor at Renewal Church Chicago. So it's a pleasure to have him as always. It's been cool for me too, because I remember when Derrick first came to Chicago with Brian Laritz at Moody. And that's when I was still working at Moody Radio. And he was just a visionary saying, hey, I'm hoping to come to Chicago. So to kind of see that transition from coming to visit to actually planting and thriving over here has been beautiful to see. And now he's on my side of town, Brownsville, baby. So, he's officially fam now. But and then we also have Kensen Lam. He's with Park Community Church, Bridgeport. Kensen doesn't just serve at Bridgeport. I know he also does other work at the larger community of Park as well. But he's been a brother in the Lord. It's been good to get to know over the few years. And then lastly, my man, Pastor Watson Jones of Compassion Baptist Church. Me and Watson go back to 2011, I believe, 2012, when he was actually my intern director. So I went to go do my internship under his tutelage and leadership, which basically meant he passed all the youth leadership as far as leading Bible study for the summer over to me.
Sorry, Ashanti, that you had to go through that.
Yeah, no, it was good times. It was good times.
It blessed me deeply.
It was good times. It was good times. But no, so in light of what we're talking about, reconvening, doors are opening up. Before we fast forward, I just want to kind of talk to you guys about this last year. Especially I want to start with you, Watson, because you were transitioning from coming back from Philadelphia, back to home, back in the South Side, Compassion Baptist Church. What has it been like in this transition over the last year in light of COVID hitting our city the way it has?
Yes. So I'll speak. I'll kind of lead it from Compassion. It was like, my church is 140 years old. It is, it is comprised of senior saints all the way to younger saints. And, we were starting to see good momentum. When you're transitioning a church, when you're planting a church, momentum is something that you seek to get. And then COVID jumps in and stunted that bad boy. And put a halt to it. So I think the transition has been really interesting because a lot of my ideas, some of my philosophy of ministry that relates to outreach and connecting to the community, not for connections or service sake, but for highlighting the gospel. It has been good because it's allowed me to lean more into that. I pastor a church that has a very nice building, but people who know me from my church know I really don't care much about buildings. I see the importance of them, but I don't, I'm not married to them. So for me, it has been easier to push the church to be more present as it has always been, but to push it to be even more present, to kind of address and speak to and serve real pressing needs, with working with some of you all on here with food needs, but then, COVID testing things and other kind of ways that we try to be of a light. I think it's been interesting trying to transition, especially the segments of our church that really was very suspicious of technology and suspicious of the internet. Some of them did not have smartphones or iPads. A few of them didn't even have internet. And so this process of having to, gather a team to switch virtual, but then to also have members of that team literally help some of the older people figure out what Facebook is and how to get on Facebook, creating fake profiles and things like that. So that's been interesting, but it also has allowed me to be able to be pastor. When you're transitioning a church, you may have title of pastor, but you don't become pastor for like 5 years. It's allowed me to really be pastor because people have felt the weight of this pandemic. And, it has allowed me to be able to really try to provide pastoral care to a very real pressing, and nobody in our church was alive in 1919. So this is all new for all of us. So to actually have to lead people through that, some of my members who had experienced the civil rights movement up front, had never seen anything like this. And so it really allowed me to kind of speak into that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think that's something we don't often think about, especially for those of us who are in the younger generation, is that idea that there are some people so far removed from technology that they would not have internet or a smartphone. And so, Kensen, you mentioned it earlier, this idea of kind of like, you were like, hey, real church is in the building. So as that shifted for you, like, what has this last year been like for you and your congregation adjusting and having to pivot?
Yeah, man. Just being frank with you guys, man. This last year has been really hard and just quite honestly scary. So, really hard in the sense that like all of us, we don't jump into this calling because we want to talk in front of a camera or lead Zoom meetings all day, right? Like we come in because we actually love the gathering. We love shepherding people and being with the people. So as I think I shared earlier, it's just kind of when this whole thing happened, like it just had to make me really think like, who am I as a pastor and what exactly is my job in this? And that just created all kinds of issues in terms of my worth and identity and the work that I'm doing. And it also created a level of fear too, because, one of the ways that as pastors, you get a pulse of what's going on in your church is who's showing up for the weekend gathering. Like you can see like who's there, but once you go virtual, like it's like, yeah, you can look at the views on the YouTube or whatever and kind of get an idea of who's like engaging, but it's difficult because people pretty much like one day just completely disappear and they're supposed to like socially distance, like they're supposed to be disappeared. Like they're supposed to be away from each other. And like, parts of your heart, like you start to worry like, well, what about giving? Like Sundays are such a big front door for our church for newcomers. Like, what do you do with that? Right. So like, just as a pastor, you kind of have those kind of, worldly type of fears, right? Those are not fears rooted in faith, but they are rooted in just kind of just worldly fears. And again, just over and over again, like just having to wrestle with God with that. And this happens twice, right? So this happened in March, but then when the summer and things were kind of like the positivity rate was lowering, we're actually starting to meet back in person again. But then the second surge happened again. And when I thought I learned all the lessons I had to learn, I realized that I didn't learn my lesson because the same fear and the same anxiety was crippling my heart. So all that to say is that this past year has been really hard. It's been fearful. I've talked to a lot of pastors who felt the same way, and quite honestly, like I can sympathize with so many of those pastors who are like, once the pandemic hit and lockdown hit, they're all screaming like, "Give us our worship! Give us our worship! We need to meet for worship." And there's a part of my heart that wanted to do the same thing. But this again is where I think the pandemic has been a gift because it had me reevaluate what exactly is the church. And for many churches, like if they're a one purpose church, if they're only about the Sunday gatherings, guess what? This pandemic is going to destroy them. And I think statistically 1 in 5 churches are going to come out of this pandemic and they'll never reopen their doors again. But just to be reminded that, that church is not just our church is not just a one purpose kind of church. Sundays are important, but there's also outreach, mission, mercy ministry, fellowship and community, and prayer and so forth. So for me, like, if church leaders are willing to learn about what God has to teach us through the pandemic, the church can come out much stronger, from this.
Yeah, that's some good stuff right there. Now, Kensen, do you guys have a property that you own or are you guys renting?
No, we're currently renting. So we meet in an art center here in Bridgeport. So that kind of adds to another complexity to reconvening, and I can share about that later.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, okay, I'm curious because I know, Derrick, that probably hit you because I know you guys have been at Wells and CPS shut down stuff fast. So like, what has this last year been like for you guys and having to transition and pivot in such a short amount of time in light of those situations?
Yeah, man, much like what they've already said, I think it was tough for us. It was tough for everyone. But, thinking about what we were as a church, we were 6.5. Well, we weren't even 6 years old. We're 5.5 years old, but our church was in this phase of, it was growing big time, so, may average 300 people a week, but you come in each week at that time in the beginning of the year and you felt like you saw a new crew every week. So it was like, man, we're on this, it's a surge, things are happening. And then the pandemic hit and we got the notice I think it was a Friday that we couldn't come in that Sunday. And so within 2 days, God bless my team, they're amazing. We had to figure out online for Sunday. So we came in Saturday, recorded everything, and we had it up there Sunday. But we had to figure that out. And that was a week earlier than I think everyone else closed down. So I think this past weekend we had been online for a year. And so it was a tough shift. And instantly, if you ever planted a church, for me, I just went right back into church plant mode and just make it happen, charge the heel kind of mentality, where we had to figure it out. We just had to walk through it. And it wasn't just about getting a service out. It was, we still need to be present with our people, and to where you were present on Sunday with people, you can't be present with them anymore. So you weren't just thinking about services, but we're figuring out, how do we do our groups now? And how do we meet together? What does it look like for us to connect with people, communicate with them? And I won't take much time with this because we'll talk about it more, but what they kind of mentioned was what Watson and Kensen kind of hitting at. The language we've kind of used is this, like, getting back to the essentials or grassroots ministry of the church, outreach. And for us, it's just discipleship too. I think the church, and I'm talking about the big C church, we had gotten so focused on Sunday services, and I like to say lights, camera, action type ministry, to where God calls us to make disciples. And so that does happen on Sunday morning, but what does it look like through the week? Are you out in your community? Are you meeting with other people? And so we got to kind of pull back a little bit. And I think God just kind of pulled back the curtains on a lot of ministries now and said, what are you really focusing on? Are you doing my work, or are you building your platform? What are you trying to do? And for us, we got to do that. For me personally, I think I'm a rhythm kind of guy. So I have a routine, and I have my calendar that I work through. And I didn't say it earlier, but I mean, it threw me for a loop. I have 5 kids. And so if it's not in my calendar, and if I'm not kind of working through this regimen, I'm like, I need to work with that. And so within COVID, as you know, there ain't no regimen. E-learning with 5 kids is crazy. And so not traveling, I like traveling because I get a little bit break, and I love my kids, but I get to get away. And so that, and not being able to work out, not go to the gym, all of these things that I had put in my rhythm. Yeah. And that's church. That was the same thing. And so I think one thing too, as I talk about the essentials, the other thing was I learned a lot more to appreciate the structure, the rhythms that we do need in our lives, and the spiritual disciplines of spending time with God and community and my family. Just don't take it for granted. Don't just do it, but be in it. Be present with God and present with people. And so that's been big for me, and it's something that we really preached to our church throughout the last years, focusing on spiritual disciplines, which is really good, just bringing people back to the essentials.
That's good. Now, fellas, I want, as we continue to go, everybody who's tuned in, if you've got questions, throw them in the chat. I'll take my time to get to the questions again tonight, or should I say today. We're not saying we've got the solution to everything, but we definitely want to be able to, as brothers come together, and as we have questions, try and explore those questions together and see how we might be able to help each other. And there'll be possibly an opportunity for you even to possibly share some insights you may have gleaned, or some things that'll be helpful for us all. But this can go to Derrick, Kensen, and Watson. Y'all just jump in as you see fit. There have been a lot of ministries, I'm not gonna name names, but who have been like gung-ho. We got to reconvene. They're keeping us from being able to, the church and state, you can't do this. And so there's been this big press to reconvene. And now we're kind of in a season now with, in light of the shots and the vaccinations being administered now, that is a real reality. What are some things you guys are processing? And this varies for both of you, but I'm especially curious with you, Watson, in light of the ages of your church and the age difference. How are you guys going through that process of, like, even evaluating the steps needed to take place in order to even do reconvening and bringing people back into the house of worship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was one who was very against opening until I was like, we're not opening until COVID is done, because my congregation, maybe 60% of it, is in that, deadly category of comorbidity or age. And so, and then where our church is located, 60617, was one of the areas that really pretty much maintained a high occurrence of COVID-19 cases and deaths. So to me, it was not a question, and I'm certain I made people angry with that, but my argument was no one has to bury people in this room, and no one has to have the awkward conversation with family members like I will. And so that was our stance. For me, it became apparent that it's time to consider it. And I speak in all tentative terms. We attempted it one time. I got close once in a fit of emotion, like I just miss everybody, and pulled it back the next week. For me, the fact that a lot of my congregation have already gotten shots. First one, many are getting seconds now. Just because of age. A lot of the older people, they talked about on the news just recently how a lot of people are starting to travel, and grandmamas can now go to houses because they were the first to get those shots. So now that we're there, we feel a lot more comfortable with the reopening. I have always, even with our team, as we talked about like guidelines and numbers. So whether it's 50, whether it's 100, I've always been one to err on the side of caution, just because there will invariably be people who won't get vaccinated for different reasons. And I'm not going to guilt anyone in that, but there are people who will not get vaccinated. So to me, whereas they may say 50 people, I don't take 50 attendance. I say 40 people, because my team counts as, some of the statistics were like, your team don't count in that number, but I'm like, they're not on a different planet. They're humans. So they can catch the virus. They counted at 50. So I've been one who said we cannot go over that number at all. And I've been very militant about that. Half of our building is open and has been open because we have a daycare, and that daycare has its own set of guidelines and it follows with the state. And that we have to sort of be careful of those things as well. So we've mapped out everything with our team. And for me, that entails my chair of trustees, chair of deacons, my secretary, some strategic thinking people. And there's a woman at our church who works for Lightfoot, and another one who works in the health department. So I feel like they're more in the know about some stuff. And so we map out everything from when you enter the door to when you go in, and how we've set certain doors as do not enters and certain as exits. Places like, when you're dealing with in old Black churches, fellowship halls mean something, where you go and you have coffee and cookies, all that's closed. We aren't having any Sunday school classes other than what we currently have, which is all virtual, just because I still ain't comfortable with people being in a tighter room. And just even recently, this past week, we shot a video. I got this inspiration from Derrick and Renewal. We shot a video of step-by-step, point for point, on what you will do from the moment you touch the door to when you take your seat. We outlined, do not stand up and sing. Don't take your mask off. Don't go resist the urge to go hug sister and brother so-and-so. Stay in your seat. And when it's time to leave, do not go through this exit that you always go through. Instead, go out that exit. And don't gather in the fellowship, in the foyer. Move past and go to your car and leave. I didn't say it so, harshly, but that's in essence how we walk through it, just so people can know. And I've been preparing people for months, telling them that what you formerly knew as Compassion Baptist Church, you're not going to see that. You may see something like it later, but you're not going to see that. What you knew died in March. I say it in a nicer way, but to kind of prepare, because people are coming back with expectations of, we get to come back with what we've been used to. And that's just not going to happen.
Man,
but we've used this
period
transition. Go ahead.
We're gonna be praying for you. One of those old mothers is gonna pull up on you, sir.
Oh, I know it. I already know it. I feel it in my spirit. They're getting ready. But we've tried to, and my team has been in agreement with that this is, as many, my church planner mentality says, we have to use this almost as a relaunch. And there just been things that have happened for years that just have happened because that's what you did for years.
Yeah.
Now we ain't done it for a year.
Told him that church died, Doc.
I didn't use that kind of language. I'm only using it because these are practitioners on the phone. It's practitioners, but I don't say it in that way.
Yeah. If I jump in, Ashanti, I think we much in similar ways to Watson. It's so we've been really strategic and intentional about basically abiding by what's been put before. So if it's 50, we're saying we're going to stick to 50. And to the safety precautions that are set before us. And for us, it's just we want to abide by what the city's saying, and we also want to be safe. And so we've done watch parties. We've been doing watch parties now. A little bit why we do watch parties versus everybody coming to convene at a place where we're going to worship right now. One is because I just most of us have played some kind of sport, but if you think of basketball, if you are pretty avid at playing ball or something, and you do that on a daily basis or weekly, and you just stop playing for a year, you can't just jump back into playing the way you played before. And so for me, you got to kind of warm the muscles up and stretch. You got to, strengthen those muscles you haven't used a bit to get back to where you were before. And it's the same thing in my mind, in my heart with church. People have been out of fellowship in terms of in person for a year, especially. And even if they've been fellowship with people, they haven't been doing it without some type of recommendation of safety. And so, or with a mask. So to get to a place where we're back to worshiping again with full worship in the house and as well as preaching, it's going to take some kind of, stretching those muscles and warming them up a bit. And so what we did is said, okay, well, we'll start our watch parties specifically with our groups first. And they're just watching the sermon. And then we move from that and say, we'll open it up with our church watch parties where they come in, they watch the sermon, they worship together. And then we moved from that to now I'm preaching in these watch services. Mm-hmm. There's not live worship yet, but I'm preaching in them. And then come April on Easter, we'll have a full service together. Still abiding by that 50 rule unless, they change it for some. And they may, things have been looking good in Chicago, but as of now, we've still been abiding by that 50. And for us, it just shows that we love in the city, but it's also, we want people to feel safe, but also be safe. So we do temperature checks at the door. You have to register. You can't just show up. It's not that type of party. We got more than 50 at our church. So we do several services. And so they have to register. If you're not on the registration, you can't just come in. And so it's different, but people are used to that because they're having to register for other things. They're having to be on waiting lists to get into things and things of that nature. And so that's something that we've been kind of working through. It's a shift for us. And some people on this call may have the same thing. We're not able to go back into the schools right now. So we're not only, to Watson's language, we're not only, because this is the thing, you're not just restarting your church. You just can't open up. If you've been not doing it for a year. So we're replanting, but we're also in a new location and starting live stream because we've been pre-recording some things. So we're doing live stream now with multiple services in a different place. So there's so many different facets to this. So from a leadership level as a pastor, not only am I leading my church through this, but my staff, nobody on my staff planted the church with me. So for them, it's like, oh man, we're running and clicking on all cylinders. It's a little different than what we've been used to. So leading them through that. And I think it may have been Lawrence. Somebody said I think it was Dwayne earlier, just talking about the invisible church and things of that nature. So we got people coming in person, but then you got a lot of people still online. And still just kind of, again, stretching those muscles, working them out to get them back to that place. Because I do want people to fellowship, but I want us to do it in a way that's safe.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, well said. I don't have too much more to add than what these brothers are sharing, but very much in the same way, like the approach that we've had, at least speaking for the Bridgeport location that I pastor, we've been cautious. I don't think that this is one area where the church should be leading the way in regards to disregarding guidance and science. And our governor and mayor, they have led pretty conservatively, which have made it pretty easy for me to kind of know how to best lead my church. Like states like Texas, where they're lifting everything, like as a pastor, I would have a very difficult time trying to navigate situations like that. I think, more so kind of like the philosophy of things, like, for us as a church, like Philippians 2 really came to mind about this idea of like, are we willing to give up our rights? You know what I mean? And if we say that we love our folks, one of the ways we do that, and I really love Watson said, recognizing his population, recognizing his context, 60619, that what's most loving, is to not meet, even though people might be clamoring to meet, even though some might be saying like, it's okay to meet. I think as a pastor and elders, like we've got to be able to show that we truly love them, and that's by taking their safety seriously. And guess what? When they can see that we're willing to be disciplined in that way, they can trust us when we tell them hard things about the gospel too, right? So to me, like this is all kind of in the same movement. Also as well, to kind of within my immediate congregation, a huge chunk of my folks are Asian. Go figure, an Asian pastor. You have a lot of folks sitting in your seats who are Asian. And in general, from my observation of what I have seen, is that the Asians have been much more cautious as well in terms of reconvening. So they're not in a rush. But what I find interesting is that Caucasians seem to be much more quick to meet together and reconvene. Now, I can't speak for my Black and brown brothers and sisters. I'm not quite as aware. But at least from that dynamic, I find that incredibly interesting that when we reconvene, the whites are all coming in droves and the Asians are kind of sitting back and waiting. And I think part of me might be the Eastern and Western mindset. I think the Western mindset is much more individualistic. The Eastern one is much more collective. So when you have this idea of common sacrifice for the common good, it's already baked into an Eastern mindset. So it's much easier to do that. In addition to something that really convicted us about the processing of reconvening was this idea of public witness. So some people say like, hey, stop persecuting the church, let us worship. Look, if they're closing restaurants and gyms and salons, Disneyland, the church isn't being persecuted here, right? You know what I mean? So we can join in the sacrifice. And I think that's really important for us as a church, especially one in Bridgeport, which is like highly democratic and all that stuff. It's really important, like within our context, to model well that if these restaurants are going to pay the price, we too are going to pay the price. And quite honestly, like for us as a church, we're not playing the short game. The short game would be to meet right away, start worshiping, this is great. But we're playing the long game. We're playing credibility and integrity within our neighborhood. We want to be able to show them over time that you can trust us as a church. And COVID-19, this pandemic, is an opportunity to show that you can trust us and that we take the safety of our members seriously and we take the safety of you very seriously. So that's kind of the way that we've approached reconvening. But what Derrick and Watson said, yeah, we also have pre-registration. We have social distancing. We have people sit in their pods. We have a capacity limit as well too. We also have, what we've actually done a little bit differently is that we've actually had our singing towards the back of our worship gathering. So people can join in and hear the message. And we understand that during the singing piece, it's a little more risky. You know what I mean? So we give people the option that if you want to dismiss yourself, you're more than welcome to do so. So we've actually moved our corporate singing towards the very end. So that's kind of something unique that we've done around our regathering.
Mm. That's very interesting that you showed that last caveat. I think that's helpful as far as new ways and ideas of which you can kind of reintegrate some of the old things, but in a new way. I'm curious, Kensen, this is a little more directed towards you. How's it been for you as an individual leader at Bridgeport in light of being a part of a broader community of churches where your peers may have different views as far as, hey, we're ready to open and keep it going? Like, how has that just been for you personally as you've engaged it?
Oh man, it's Jason is on the phone call as well too. So he actually serves on the lead pastor team with me, and he remembers that when this thing first came out in March, there are all different types of opinions in regards to how this was going to be handled and how we should do it, because right, like there's some people who are going to lean into the fact that, guess what, separation of church and state, that all the state can do is give us guidance. We don't need to listen to them, right? And there's some on our staff who are very much like, yes, which means that, you know what, we're essential as well too. We need to worship, that we have to care about people's physical health. So we need to also care about their spiritual health. So let's meet, let's reconvene. Yes, I hear that. Okay, so I hear that. And then you have me, and as I've shared, I'm on the other side of things where I'm like, whoa, hold up. Church and ministry doesn't have to just be done. Everything doesn't have to be all on Sundays here. We don't need to put everything in one basket here. We don't need to fight so hard to meet here. We don't need to petition the mayor and governor to give us our space to worship. So actually the dynamic within our church was actually very interesting in how we did it. So what we ended up deciding after many hard conversations between all the different church locations that we had that are on the north side, city center, on the south side, is that we just decided that what was best is that we would let each individual location make the decision with their elder team to decide what is best for their context. And once again, I think that's a huge aspect to it, because not every neighborhood is experiencing it all in the same way, nor like with the same type of demographic or whatever. So it was really difficult for us as a church to kind of make a blanket statement to say every location has to do the exact same thing, because not everyone's the same. And for example, like Rogers Park, like they actually meet in the school, and their lease has not only ended, but they're not coming back. So kind of like, everyone's going to be meeting back in different ways, in different forms. So instead of trying to police everything, we just said that, we trust your elder team. We trust the pastors here to lead well during this time. And for the most part, we can say with confidence that they have, and people have responded accordingly. So that's kind of how we've gone about it. I know that some church leaders might have done it differently. They might have just said like, we all start together, this and that. But we've chosen to decentralize so that our pastors and elders can lead within their context.
Yeah, and I think that was helpful just to hear from your perspective, because I was curious. I'm sure Jason could. I know Jason got his thoughts and stuff he could share as well. But it's just kind of cool because I think everybody has a different church dynamic in which they're operating. And so, when you kind of exist independently, it does give you a certain bit of authority, just kind of, hey, this is where we're going. But when you're in a collective, it does create a new nuance. And as we kind of think about that, I'm just curious, like, okay, we know that church will never be the same. The idea that somehow I compare it to September 11th. So those of us who are old enough to remember where you can actually walk your loved one to the gate. When they arrived, you could have all 30 of your family members at the gate waiting for them to come off. We love that. It was a beautiful thing. But after September 11th, we knew that would never happen again. It shifted things forever. And I feel as if this is a similar shift where it's like, this is going to alter how church is for the next 20 plus years. So what are some specific ways that you guys, or believe at least, that things are going to look different in the long term as far as church? It's hot potato. Whoever wants to jump it, grab it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a bit. I mean, it's a loaded question. There's a lot there. But I think technology, for one, has changed the game, not only in the world period, but in our churches. So you had to learn how to do, whether you were doing live stream or pre-recording, you had to learn how to do things online, Zoom, all of that, like we're on right now. You had to learn how to do that. And so there's I know we don't necessarily like it, but there's a part of church where your online ministry is going to have to be important. So how do you minister to people online? If you didn't have a live stream, or if you didn't pre-record or something, how do you now minister to that context? Because we're in the reality of, even if we reopen tomorrow, there are certain people that are not coming back for months, and they're still going to consider themselves a part of your church. And so how do you get somebody from online to in person, but then also kind of manage the tension of people may come to church twice a month, or they already did this, but they may come to church once or twice a month, and they be online once or twice a month. And so using language like online is great, more evangelistic, but we don't want you to stay there. We want you to come here. But also the tension of saying they may not come to Sunday service. It may be a group or a small group or Bible study that. And so I think, like I said earlier, the essentials of ministry is really to just really harp on that a bit more, to say what are because the measurements, if you want to say, for success in church has changed. And so what are we actually doing? Whether it's being in community, are we discipling folks? Are we doing those essential things that Jesus has called us to? And are we affirmed more so in that versus how many people we have filling a seat? Because that's not going to be it in terms of your space and people coming in there. I think churches right now, I think most of them are seeing that are in person are seeing a third maybe of their congregation at most. And so if your measurement was how many we had in the seat, how many people came to Jesus that Sunday in person, or how many people were at this group in the house, all of that shifted. And so I think ministry just changed in a big way than where it was before. And as pastors, we have to do a good job of managing that tension instead of just solving the problem all the time. We got to know where people are and care for them and meet them where they are, whether that's through technology or in person. So in a lot of ways, we're pastoring a couple different types of churches. You went to multi-site, multi-campus overnight in terms of your online ministry and in person. And to me, I think that's the avenue we're kind of walking into as churches. And I think there will be people that rail against that. But if you think about the generation that's coming up, they got technology in the palm of their hands in everything they do. And so for them, it's easy for them to switch over. It may not be for our older saints. So there's going to be attention to manage and a lot more ministry, and essentially sometimes a little bit more work than what we were doing before. And so in short, I think that's kind of, I mean, that doesn't cover everything you asked, but there's going to be a big shift in technologies made that shift for us.
I'll jump in too. I think one of the things that I think we've contemplated at our church is what constitutes a church member, and not necessarily thinking on a theological question about it, but more, for example, so, you have several church members, like I have church members who watch, after my service, they watch my pastor, and then they watch, they watch Charlie, then they watch, this and that. And so, and some of them probably give across all of those. I doubt it, but some probably do give across all of those spaces. And will be able to say honestly that they have been fed by all of those spaces. And so the lines, I don't think the lines are as blurred as I may think they are, but I wonder, like, who will still say that Compassion is still my church? I think people still say it, but I don't know. I think given the fact that there also have been people who have been watching and giving who are not in Chicago, what then do we say about that? Now, for most people say, well, that's an on-campus ministry. At an established church, that is a massive paradigm shift for people to even fathom an online campus. It ain't for me, but for many. Yeah. And so, those things in a Baptist church have constitutional questions, bylaw questions. Mm-hmm. And that. I also think, I'm not necessarily one who, I think there'll be people who will be slow to come back, but I don't necessarily know if I'd be one. I know there are some who say, and that they make good valid arguments about whether or not, the churches are going to be smaller now and, and all that. I don't necessarily know if I ascribe to that because, pandemics have happened. Chicago had one, as it did America, 1918, 1919, and Chicago shut their churches down then. Many of them did and didn't have social media, didn't have anything. And some kind of way, after that, you still had, on the south side of Chicago, Pilgrim Baptist Church had 3,000-4,000 people. Progressive had 5,000-6,000 people, so I don't know. So I think the main thing for me, as I think about in terms of, it's just really what's going to constitute a church member, given that different from that period, there are options now, and easy options now that people have grown very accustomed to social media and YouTube. And so I think as I think about changes in my church, the face of activity in my church has changed, where prior to COVID, a lot of the active people were older. And that was a lot to deal with because older people are retired, they got opinions and time. Whereas now a lot of who has carried the church in terms of activity have been younger and newer. And so I'm excited, and I really mean excited to see what kind of tensions that's going to create, but also what kind of opportunities that's going to create as it relates to just thinking about how my church is just really has been changed and is going to change in 2021 and into 2022.
I'm curious real quick, how are you guys processing this idea of, okay, you've got space, you've got people coming back in, but in light of the number regulation, are you guys prepared have you guys thought through the reality of like, you know what, in order to kind of meet the needs, I might need to have 3, and depending on the size, upward to 4 services on a given Sunday in order to meet the people who want to actually come inside?
I was so resistant to that at first until Sunday. I really was. I was like, we ain't even perfected one new kind of service yet. That was my mentality. We got to perfect one, and the rest of these people just gonna have to watch online. But the reality is, because we're aiming at Easter as a reopening, the reality is there are many people who wish they could have been there last Easter and one Easter, and this Easter might be a chance. And so, we're at least gonna go for 2. Yeah. And I ain't gonna lie, I thought yesterday maybe even 3, but the services are shorter now. I still preach with passion and strength. So I'd have to change that a little bit. It has been nice not having to preach multiple services. I will say that. This has been great. I ain't been as tired on Sundays. I've been able to do work on Mondays now. Mondays is a work day. Whereas if I go back to that, Monday becomes an off day again. And that's, but yeah, no, we are considering that, and just had a conversation with some of my staff about it yesterday about, we need to be prepared for that. Cause I promise I resisted it all month. Like, no, we're only gonna do 1 until Sunday.
Yeah, just to answer in short, we're already planning for 3. It's just kind of something we're doing. Yeah. But yeah, so we've been preaching, even our watch service, we're doing 2 services here. So to Watson's point, I'm working my muscles out again for that. Yeah. So we went into the pandemic in 2 services, but 3, it's not what you want to do. I don't think 3 services of 50, but it's want to give people a chance. It's safe and to be able to come fellowship. Yeah. Sorry, Kensen, I think you were about to say something.
No, just to jump in on that. Yeah. So what we're doing is that we have been reconvening in person, but on Easter, we're actually going to move everything back outdoors. So we're just going to go ahead and, worship outdoors. We know that you deal with the weather, production is going to have to be minimized, but the incredible upside is that you can have the body show up, and be able to distance and, and not worry about that capacity limit and issue. So that's kind of how we're going about it. And actually, just back to your earlier question about just like kind of how we see the church changing, just a couple additional thoughts is that I think, Derrick said it well about technology. I think moving forward as ministry leaders, like this idea, like now that when we plan meetings or classes or whatever, a new question that we've probably never asked before is, should we do this virtually or in person? Right? This is going to be like a new question we're going to have to ask for everything that we do. We have a leadership meeting. Should this be virtual or in person? Because this is now going to be a norm. This is going to be a norm within the workplace. I think for some of us, we're going to have to disciple back some of our folks, because some of those who are a little bit more introverted or consumeristic, like they're going to like this, like they've thrived under this season because they love this. This is only reinforced, like, yes, I get to sit in my PJs and do that. So for some of them, we're gonna have to disciple them back into the gathering. But I also hope as well too that for the church, one of the things that I was most impressed with the church is that, and the church members, is how quickly people pivoted when they needed to in March. And I hope that we don't lose that spirit of innovativeness that so often I hear people say, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. I want things to go back to normal. It's like, well, is that a good thing? Like, is that really what you want? And I think the gift again of the pandemic is that it's forced the church to think outside the box. For the church leaders who are willing to think outside the box, that's a good thing. That's a good thing for mission. And just finally, kind of like how 9/11 was kind of a seared in traumatic moment for the country, COVID is going to be a traumatic moment for us as a world. So this is going to be something as preachers and teachers and just their shepherding and counseling that we're going to go back to over and over again. I know that, with Renewal Church, they just did like a mental health thing, which is a genius thing to do, and something that we're going to have to continue to do, with our folks as they work through this, the fear of joblessness and the insecurity and uncertainty of the future. You know what I mean? So it's going to be once this pandemic's done, that's still going to be an ongoing trauma we're going to have to need to shepherd and pastor through.
Ashanti, can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Watson said something that I think was really key, and we've done at our church, which is shorten our services. And I would say that, going back in, that's one thing that I know people want to fight that tension and have an hour and a half service, 2 hour service. The reality is people through technology and through this season, their attention spans have lowered more than ever. And so for us, we try to keep our services in an hour right now. And so we shorten our worship, shorten the sermon time. People love it. You know, they stay attentive, at least in our statistics and things of that nature. And I know that's, you know, we want to preach our 45-minute sermons and we want to be up there, but it's been a good practice even too to maybe work in those sound bites of this era that we're in and making sure people get information and be able to give it to them, be more concrete and clear in what we're saying and what we're giving out to our people. So I just wanted to say that, like, that may be a good thing. We've definitely done it. And as people think about coming back, to just really think about shortening your service.
And I think that's one of the things, it's a shift in tradition. This is what we're used to. And so even for a preacher, it's like going back to grad school when it's like, hey, your prof was like, you got 20 minutes to get this thing out. It needs to be quality in 20 minutes. So it's a challenge as well of just kind of adjusting to that new normal or reverting back to something that's completely different. I'm going to slightly pivot because we're getting ready to transition out. And so this is a little curveball, but I want to call someone out because he's who I consider, he's the OG on the phone as far as I'm concerned. And that's Pastor Dwayne Davis of New Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church. And I just want to kind of ask you, as someone who is a senior to us in the ministry and who's been in Chicago, a staple, like, how's this been for you right now in this season? And as you process reconvening, like, what has it been like for you in your world? Okay, no. You're still muted.
Okay, there you go. I'm unmuted. First of all, I resemble that remark about being an OG. It's so crazy. I was multitasking when I first got on the phone. I just left physical therapy. I went to Panera Bread. Then I went and got a COVID test shot because I had been around some individuals that I found out later on they had COVID. So that's what I've been doing on the call, listening and processing all this information. What's interesting in our case at New Morning Star, our church last year hit our 95th year anniversary. Imagine such a grand number, and we weren't able to celebrate in November at all, in no kind of way, you know, except multimedia blurb, 95 years, hooray. Going back to 2019, the Lord put a vision in my heart to renovate the sanctuary and upgrade our technology on all fronts. So we got a sound booth, we got cameras, we got everything. Of course, you have some people that are like, we don't need that, why are we doing that? Others was like, okay, let's see where this is going, let's get behind the pastor. Then all of a sudden, March 2020 happened and everything had to shift online. So everybody was appreciative that as far as our services were concerned, we didn't miss a beat as far as Sunday morning ministry. We scaled down everything to pre-record. When things got a little bit relaxed, we had our praise team to come in to pre-record the music. I enjoyed being at home on Sunday, watching myself pre-record it and being able to, praise and worship with the rest of the saints. So, I'd be in my PJs watching service. Afterwards, I go do what I want to do. Well, when we first had the reopening, we didn't do any numbers, any restrictions or anything like that, because I know our flock, I knew no more than 15 people were going to show up. And true enough, 10 showed up. And the next Sunday, I think about, we didn't go over 30. So I wasn't worried about pre-registration and so on and so forth. Then it shut back down. Our multimedia team began to get stressed because for those of you all who have multimedia teams who pre-record services and get everything ready for Sunday, that's a lot of work. At the beginning, they thought it was just going to be, maybe 5-6 weeks. Now they were into 3 months, 5 months, and so on and so forth. We had a food pantry that operates 51 weeks out of the year. That had to shut down. That hurt our community outreach, to feed the hungry in our community. There were several other ministries that we had going on. Everything just came to a screeching halt. Give you all a real quick description on how I felt as a pastor, because we had 2 members die from COVID within 30 days, husband and wife, and then another individual in our congregation, not from getting it in the congregation, but had it. But here's the thing that made it so difficult. This is how I described it. I felt like I was a real shepherd out in Ireland or in Israel. The sheep fell into a pit I can't get to them and they can't get to me. And that really messed me up for about like a month, especially when I hear people dying. I couldn't go over there, couldn't go to the hospital, had the social distance at the funeral. So it was like I was this helpless shepherd and the sheep were hurting and I couldn't get to them and minister to them on that level. As time began to, move and we began to become more relaxed with everything, one of the things that I thank God for with our congregation is that we were a tight-knit congregation and fellowship. Even though we've got over 350 people, everybody don't know everybody, but everybody knows somebody. And so the saints began to minister to each other. The Sunday schools went online. There were seniors ministries reaching out to everybody. The kids ministry had their own thing going. So it was cool for me to see everybody was doing their best to stay connected. Now, it's interesting we have this call because now we just reopened, say like, what's this, March, 1st of February. And once again, we did no number restrictions. We had everything in place. People knew how to, like the other pastor said, how to come in, go out, the whole dynamic, communion. And it's been great to see. However, there's so many layers of this. All of us on the phone right now remind me of the Old Testament prophets, how they ministered during the same era, but at different locations, giving God's message to different portions of Israel. All of us have different roles in our different locations, and everything is not going to look the same. However, the sheep still needs to be ministered to. And so my Sunday morning has now gone back to a relative, like last Sunday, we had an 8 o'clock service crowd. Back before the pandemic, we were maximizing both services. Now we shut it down, we're opening it back up. Now, last Sunday looked like our 8 o'clock service crowd, but spread out throughout the sanctuary. There are those who want to come back. There are those who don't want to come back. There are those who've gotten relaxed. There are those who need to be nudged and say, just come and dip your toe in the water, see what it's like. And it's not as bad as you're thinking it is based on constantly listening to social media, the news, with this constant negativity. So it's been that way for me. Just last night, I had a conference call with our choir because we have a praise team, but we had a choir and they wanted to get the choir back for Easter. Once again, some wanted to participate, some saying I'm not coming back, some said I don't know. And they're just testing the waters. And it's been cool to see the change because I see now the saints are more connecting with each other than ever before. Because Sunday morning, that's not fellowship time. That's meet and greet. Hey, how you doing? Hey, how's the job? And then everybody goes to their cars and go home. Now they're calling each other on the phone and staying on the phone a long time and reaching out and visiting each other, social distance now that you can go outside and what have you. So that's how I've managed it, but not one church is going to look like the other.
Yeah.
I don't think personally that we're not going to go back to normal. I believe we're going back to normal, but with new stuff.
Gotcha.
With new levels of technology in place, with new levels of how to do outreach now, because can I put it like this? God kind of used this to spank the church.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, what were we doing? Now we'll go back more refined, more focused as we see the day approaching.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, man. We appreciate that. I appreciate you coming. I know I caught you off guard. I didn't get a chance to text you in advance on that one.
Oh, that's okay.
But of course, appreciate you. Pastor Davis was one of the first churches I actually visited when I came to Chicago from Atlanta, GA. So I remember getting over there.
Yeah.
So always good to see him. Well, everybody, thank you so much for the time today. Thank you. Hopefully you had some questions answered, or maybe this has even caused you to ask more questions and be in the process what it looks like for you guys. Again, this is something we're doing every month through the month of May. So just go ahead and knock these dates down. Next month, April the 15th, again, second Wednesday of the month, and then May 12th, we'll be getting together. We'll be discussing two different topics. on those dates. One will be centered around kind of church finances. As many of you guys have already heard us say, there's been an adjustment of how we're handling finances. What does it look like for the church to be sustained and kept in light of people having multiple options of places to go serve, and then that spreads their money out as well. But also we're going to be talking about community engagement. Watson alluded to this earlier, and Pastor Davis alluded to it, just kind of some of the community outreach and the food trucks and things of that nature. I know Dr. Dace has been very pivotal in that. We've got Chicago Delivers through the Chicago Partnership. We've been active in making sure we're trying to get food and resources out, but we want to continue to see, in light of COVID, the summer's getting ready to hit, how can we continue to thrive in community engagement as well? So as always, we love y'all. We appreciate you. And be sure to stay tuned. You'll get more information about those upcoming dates and events. And man, just thank you for your time today and for the fellowship. All right. Y'all have a good one. Be easy, everybody.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.